Hey, everybody, what's up? Tony here with Play by Play U, and it's time for another edition of the PXPU podcast, where every Thursday we talk to someone who's got the knowledge, the wisdom, the education, and the insight that you need in order for you to be the best you can while calling the sports that you love. I'm the voice of the Washington Huskies, and this podcast is a part of Play by Play University. It's a Substack of mine where I'm making it my mission to create the best, most insightful, instructive, helpful content, practical stuff from a guy that's done it for 23 years, the best stuff that you can find on the internet for basically the price of a cup of coffee a month. You can get the podcast for free every week. That's available. Just subscribe to that. But also for $5.99 a month or for $60 a year for now, you can get on the Substack. And we've got all kinds of great stuff on here, like weekly articles on skill building, how to prepare for a basketball game, sports as a song with a vocal performance end of things. And then there's the career building stuff, because you need to know how to advance once you actually start calling games. It's not just about the practical lessons, though. You want to hear from other people who have done it. Here's our archive of podcast guests. Then you take a look at how to automate your game prep so you can just be elite at that sort of thing. I've been working on this for 5 to 6 years and using Google Sheets and Excel and AI and really becoming one of the best there is at figuring out how to automate your materials so that way you don't end up typing a bunch of stuff you don't need in order to prepare for a broadcast. You can really be efficient with the way that you go about this. We've also got other resources to help you get critiques. There's all sorts of stuff on here. So please check us out, Play by Play, the letter U at Substack.com. All right, today's guest is going to be Tim Bickford. He's a network manager, senior network manager at Learfield, and he and I go way back. He joined the company 14 years ago when I hired him. I was just in my second year there, but I brought him on, and he's been with the company ever since. And he's got great insight because not only is he a guy that manages a lot of different radio properties for Learfield, but he also calls a lot of games for Learfield as well. He's a really good play-by-play announcer. He had a heck of a run with Virginia Tech basketball through the ACC tournament and into the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago, and he talks about how you can continue to climb the ladder as a play-by-play announcer without getting a ton of reps every year, but also how you can get bigger and better opportunities just by who you surround yourself with. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, here's Tim Bickford. I thought it'd be fun to catch up with Tim Bickford, who was the first person I ever hired back at what was then IMG College, and what has now become Learfield. And you're still there 14 years later, still there as are you a network manager now? What's the structure? What's the title?
Yeah, senior network. Trying to do the math here on job titles versus names of the company, and I think names of the company might have me in job titles by one. So, yeah, senior network manager, senior audio network manager, because we're not radio anymore, audio at Learfield now. So yeah, and 14 years this July. So
Okay, so here's what's really fascinating, and one of the things that I wanted to point out is you have one of my favorite calls, and I'll admit I'm biased because listening to you was a really fun thing for me to get to do, as someone who is an acquaintance for a long time, a friend, and hearing your opportunities filling in for Virginia Tech on the ACC network, and they hit a buzzer beater in the ACC tournament en route to a magical run to the NCAA tournament, and summoning Jack Buck, we'll see you tomorrow night sort of call was one of my all-time favorites. But you're not like the voice of a team per se, and you don't know even from year to year how many games you're going to call going into that year. And yet, through this Learfield ecosystem, you have carved out a pretty nice place for yourself where you get to call some big time things and have a lot of fun doing it. So, explain to people like how you get opportunities to call games and what it is that you do all year round that allows those opportunities to manifest.
yeah, as mentioned, 14 years, and I still have not really perfected this answer. You'd think every Christmas when my family asks what I do, I would have gotten this down by now, but it's still tough. But in working with so many schools year to year or over the course of my time at Learfield, um, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of fill-in play-by-play when generally primary play-by-play voice is off with football and fill in on basketball. In the case of Virginia Tech, John Laser had left in January or January 1st of that year, and they had an opening, and that was probably the closest I've been to really doing a team full time. It was full time for 2.5 months. Learfield also has the national rights to a number of tournaments, and I've been fortunate enough to call ACC men, ACC women, SEC men this year, women, SEC baseball. And so with Learfield having its hands in so many different areas and with so many different schools, I've been fortunate enough to fill in on. I don't even know how many at this point. Virginia Tech was the primary one. I was able to fill in for you last year, I think 4 games, which
Yeah.
was awesome to do that. Michigan, West Virginia, the list goes on. Ohio, so the list goes on and on. And I've been really fortunate with some of the games I've called. I've gotten really lucky. The Virginia Tech run was cool. I also happened to call like Jim Boeheim's last game, the ACC tournament, which Wake beat Syracuse on a buzzer beater. There was some American Conference tournament games, which you did before me, and some cool opportunities there. So it somehow has always worked out, even if I'm calling 1 game a year or 20. It's usually resulted in some fun times.
This job at Learfield is the job that, I mean, you started out in a different role part time, but it's the job you got out of college and you've been with the company for all this time. And I'm curious, like, what were your expectations of just how to carve out opportunities to call games when you were coming out of school? And what would you almost like say to yourself, oh man, like, you don't like, if you were talking to yourself at the age of 22 and trying to set the expectations the right way, like what would you say to yourself about how all this works?
Yeah, I don't say this to be humble. I say this to point out what I would say was probably a character defect coming out of school, which was I've often had like a lack of belief in myself. And so a lot of people when they graduate and they graduate Syracuse, especially, it's how quickly can I call games? And I just wanted to have a job. I was so afraid of not having a job and having gone to Syracuse for 4 years and then being just nowhere for the next 2 years and not having a foot in the door. So when I got the opportunity to come down to North Carolina and you hired me, I was just so happy to work in the industry. And I really wasn't even thinking of play by play in the immediate future, which is so rare. And it that probably did me a disservice because I was a little hesitant to seek out opportunities. I was not the best go-getter at Syracuse or right after. And it took me a little while to learn that even if I wasn't applying for a job or even if I didn't have a play-by-play opportunity right in front of my face, that I could and really should be doing the work to get better because then when the opportunities came along, I was prepared. And it took me a couple of years to get to that point, and I had some help, but that's probably what I would go back and tell that person, which is probably the opposite of most of the advice or the conversations that I have now on this side of things, which is be patient, wait your turn, do your thing, but it's not going to come right away. I probably need the opposite advice when I graduated school because I was not assertive enough, but over time, I got there.
I think I'm a big fan of when I hear things like that, of finding out where two things are true at the same time. And I think that one of them is that you do have to be assertive and be constantly working on your craft. That's one. Like, and whether that means, I've had some conversations with people recently about inertia and, objects at rest tend to stay at rest and objects in motion tend to stay in motion. And if you don't have a job calling games, if no one's put a game on a silver platter for you, you got to go find a way to do it. Whether you're calling games off of TV and prepping for it like it's a real deal, or you go into a local high school and trying to get their athletic director to let you stream it, or you're just getting tape at a local D1 or like whatever, you got to like have the activity level that generates activity because inertia is a real thing. And simultaneously, don't expect just because you're doing that or you've done XYZ in the past that people are going to be lining up to offer you things because it's just such a crowded space, and it's really competitive. And yet at the same time, like looking back on it now, I don't think there's anything special about me. I don't think there's anything special about you. Like we just kind of and I don't say that disparagingly about you.
No, for
I'm just
sure.
saying that like we just kind of just kept being the tortoise and the hare story and just kind of kept showing up and doing the thing for a decade or two and then eventually like things start falling into place. Like does that resonate with you?
Yeah, for sure. And, I don't know what the equation is, but it's something between hard work plus talent plus tenacity plus luck plus personality. All of that goes into it. And even that, there's no exact formula. And, like you said about two things can be true at once, at the end of this conversation, I'm probably going to have spoken out of both sides of my mouth at one point or another. But yeah, I totally agree. And what I've learned a lot recently too is focus on what you can control,
Mhm.
and the rest will take care of itself in one way, shape, or form. And that doesn't necessarily mean it will take care of itself in the form of your dream job, but it will, because that's how this world and this life works. And so, I was not doing what I could control, or not doing the most that I could early on, and that's what I can control. And that's the biggest lesson that I've tried to take with me, the past few years since I really, sunk my teeth into this, probably back in 2013. And that's what I tell people now is there's no shortage of things any of us can do to continue to get better. And that applies to someone who calls one game a year, 30 games a year, whatever. And like you said, the calling the games off the TV and getting them critiqued, and listening back, and there's just, reading, all of these areas that we can focus on that'll help us improve our play by play. And at the same time, you can't do so many things at once, and sending a tape to the same person over and over and over and over again, like that may not get you where you think it is. And there's a balance here, and that's where I think Learfield does a great service to me and to you and to those who have come through it, is that we are surrounded by so many different people, and we get a lot of different perspectives, and it's very balanced. It's not just one person, and it's not just one way, with all the schools, all the play-by-play voices, and all the people that have come before us or after us, and that are still there.
It's a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask as a follow-up question because um it's fascinating to think about the people that have come through those studios. And I was just doing a Washington at Minnesota game last weekend, and Corey Provis was the TV announcer. And then I'm flying home, and I'm on Sirius XM, and I'm listening to Carolina Duke, where David Shoemate's calling the game for the Blue Devils. And then I pop over to Georgia Tech, and I hear Andy Demetra, and then the names go on and on, right? Like, I mean, there's so many guys that have kind of come through those studios, and the question is why? What's going on there that works? Well, probably a couple of things, and the first that I would point to is such a unique role that and what's considered quote unquote good is so subjective. Um, that there are, I mean, there are clearly things that like pop on tape. Like Jason Benetti's great for a reason, right? Um, and when you hear someone who's not great, like there are things that they're not doing objectively that stick out like a sore thumb. But in the whole 250 tapes coming in for a job, here's 20, they all sound good enough. How do you kind of stick out from there? I think like one of the most important and valuable assets in the entire world is trust. And how can someone trust you with their brand if you're just a complete stranger and you're going to have like this role that could last for 3 decades? like they need to trust you. And how can they trust you? Well, they either need to know you somehow, or like someone they trust has to be able to vouch for you. And where I think Learfield comes up huge in the college sports space is we are working with every single role that could possibly have anything to do with hiring for these jobs. And I would say short of the athletic director, but even then, like I've worked with ADs in your role, right? Like so there's ADs, associate ADs for external, associate ADs for creative, sports information directors of all the different sports for the broadcasts that we produce. There are there are property general managers, there are Learfield VPs, there are property fulfillment coordinator folks, there are engineers, there are this, it's like an enormous industry ecosystem, and having the ability to interface with those people, to me it's just the proximity principle that's at work there at Learfield. And can you validate that? Can you add to that? And what are all your thoughts having heard that?
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely agree. It's funny you say the trust factor, and I don't know if this is why you say it or if you have it stuck in your head, but that's like the first message that is conveyed to somebody at Learfield when they are there for 1 or 2 years before they go call games, right? That's what you hear from a Chris Ferris or a Tom Bowman before you are even given the first opportunity to go call whatever that first game is, whether it be an ACC women's basketball game on a digital platform or something like that. Can we trust you to represent the company, and can we trust you to do a good job out in the field? And, we talked before we started a little bit about how there's so many ways to, at least in my opinion, to get to where a lot of us are trying to go, which is be the voice of a team or be a national voice or something like that, and do play by play so frequently that it's our living. And, you know, one way is to get as many reps as possible and continue to get better. And that is definitely one way. And I think that way works. And I'm not saying anything against that one way by any means. That wasn't my path or yours when we, took the job at 540 North Trade Street. You only get so many play by play opportunities in a year. And what I eventually realized was for my play by play to get better from whistle to whistle, from buzzer to buzzer, I was going to have to work on that myself and with the help of others. And then when the opportunities came, really get a chance to shine and then go back and listen. But, it was going to be incumbent upon me to really work on my play by play. But what this company does expose you to is everything you just said. And, I've been a part of hiring processes on both sides. I've applied for jobs and I've screened for jobs and I've helped hire. And every job is a little bit different. The hiring process is a little bit different. Like again, there's no exact formula, but a lot of these jobs come down to the interview or what else can you do or what other relationships do you have? Do you feel comfortable speaking in front of a room? Do you feel comfortable selling the product or the sponsorships and all of that? And that's what we're so exposed to within the walls of Learfield is everything you said. And that is why I continue to choose this path, because at this point I believe that it's a very viable way to get that next job, because we're exposed to so many things that others that may not have the same role may not be. And that can be said too for someone who goes through like the minor league baseball ranks too, right? Like it's, there's a lot that goes on in a minor league baseball season and then in the off season as well that gives someone like that either a leg up or other advantages or skills in the workforce. And unfortunately we also see sometimes what not to do, and that can be helpful as well. But I think we are so exposed to so many different people and jobs and talent and skill sets, I remember, when I came down, you were very focused on affiliate recruitment, and that to me was like, what are we doing here? What is it? How does that have anything to do with getting a play-by-play job or getting better at play-by-play? Well, at the end of the day, picking up the phone and having really difficult conversations with people that you don't know is it's a skill, it's a talent, and it will only serve you down the road, especially in a job interview process or in anything that comes along when you go work for a university or a professional team.
Yeah, you brought back some memories there. I forgot calling around tiny AM radio stations in the state of Michigan, telling them we weren't paying them anymore.
Yeah,
Like, and just having to sit there and listen to the quiet on the other end of the phone and be like, "All right, you still
yeah,
going to carry this product? Like, because if not, I'm going to call across the street and get them on the phone." So like, I mean, you're right, all that stuff. I it's fun. And truthfully, some of the people who went to bat for me to probably help get me the job at Washington were people who benefited from me having those conversations, right? So like,
right.
I mean, there's always something at play when it's part of that whole big picture. But you talked about trust uh, being such a common conversation when you go to fill in for a game, and I know I remember and I sympathize with everybody the first couple times they go to fill in because all you want to do is shine.
Hmm.
You want to impress, right? You want to be like, look what I can do. And in those situations, what has worked for so many of the people in the Learfield ecosystem when they're saying, "Hey, you're probably based on the number of games you've called, you probably should be calling D3 something.
Hmm.
We're going to give you the chance to call East Carolina here. This is D1, but you need to be trustworthy. And so, like, just go show up and just do the fundamentals. Just time and
Yeah.
score. Don't go with the Sports Center catchphrase. Or, I mean, if you do, be tasteful. Don't overdo it. And it's amazing how, Tim, I feel like all those fill-in opportunities that like ended up being this blessing in disguise where like I was not trying to like make myself the star of the show. I was really just trying to keep the seat warm for 40 minutes and read the sponsorships and not screw it up and get out of there. And something about that just kind of like working on those fundamentals, it just makes for the best possible broadcast in those situations. Did you ever have to fight back a little bit of that? And how did that go for you? Were you able to stick to the fundamentals, and did that play a role in you getting elevated to more and more bigger opportunities?
Yeah, I have two stories that don't let me end this without telling them, but totally agree. And that is something that I really stress upon the guys. And I was fortunate with the Virginia Tech opportunity that I got to call 20 straight games, which is not, I'm a rare bird. You got a similar opportunity with Clemson, and every now and then something like that pops up. But I've stressed to the guys that work below me or work with me, you know, when you go to fill in, this is not the time to really get better or work on things either. And that's where the sitting on your couch and calling games off a TV, you know, pick the three words that you're trying to get better at using, use them on your couch from your TV, and then when you go sit down to call the game, they'll be there. They'll be in the back of your head because when you sit down to fill in, there is so much going on, and it is all you can do to get the broadcast on the air to make you're probably by yourself or with a color analyst who's looking at you because you're going to lead you're steering the ship. Make sure your access is connected, make sure you get all the live reads in, make sure you don't bother the coach. And I remember one of the first fill-in opportunities that I had doing men's games, and this was a terrible idea in theory, and I'm just going to say that I was sent to Nashville to do a small November MTE, and we had the idea to have me fill in for not one but two schools. And so I was calling two games a day for two different schools whose games were bumping up against each other. And I couldn't, when I was supposed to get the App State coach for pregame, I was busy calling Tulane's game. And this was all of the things that I have learned and had learned to avoid. Like, you want to not stick out. You don't want to cause any wrinkles for anything. And it was the opposite because I wasn't available. They had to record on my time. And these are just no-nos left and right. And I remember, I was still very young. I had been working actually on the Washington broadcast for a while, and I had been listening to Bob Rondo so much. And Bob, because he had been with the Huskies for so long, was so comfortable interviewing the coaches that I just had like his question style in my head. And I remember one of the coaches came out after a game where his team came back from down 20 points and lost by two. And I just casually, thinking that it was a great effort. I said, like, Coach, great effort from your team. You've got to be really proud with how you guys battled back. And he looked at me and said, "Are you kidding me? I am absolutely not that." And just teed off on me because I had just assumed that, yeah, you must be really, and that's how you ask a question as the 30-year voice of a program. When you're filling in, the question is, Coach, your thoughts on today's game. That's how that goes, and then maybe two more. And I learned that was my learning experience for that. But and then the second quick story is this one really sticks out and showed kind of a maturation process. But when I filled in for Michigan a couple of years ago, when Brian Bush had COVID for Michigan at Michigan State, you know, I had learned so much in the 10 years since then of how to make sure those games went great. And I remember getting done, and Terry Mills and Tony Butler complimenting me on how easy I was to work with. And Terry could not believe how I just let him do his thing. And anytime Tony said, "Do you want this? Do you want that?" I just said, "What? This is your guys' thing. I'm just here." And I remember how complimentary they were and how good that made me feel. And it had nothing to do with the play-by-play. It had nothing to do with the direction on the court and how many times I said left wing. It was all because they were going to take away from that this person was really good to work with. And who knows where that leads down the road. But that's what you want. You want people to want to work with you.
Yeah, no doubt, man. It's so funny. I mean, we talk about, and I hate to repeat myself with some of these things, and I hope I don't too much, but I say it just because I feel like there's always someone who's listening for the first time who's never realized this, but like we don't get like real actual feedback all that often. Like, you're maybe in a different situation because you're in the Learfield headquarters in the network studios where you're surrounded by 30 people who have done this for 20 years, who, I mean, you all do this for a living, but like out at a school like I am, like the one piece of feedback that I've gotten from anybody at our property, anybody at the athletic department, anything was just hey, we got an email, someone didn't like your sign off, like can you not say, Selena, I'm coming home at the end of the broadcast? And I'm like, no, like that's my sign off. Like I have a little shout out to my wife and that's it. Like, and I'm not gonna stop doing that because one guy was grumpy. Like that, no. But that's the kind of feedback that you get. Like, you don't
Yeah.
realize, like, it's 100% has to do with how people feel when you're around and how you make other people feel. And the play by play has got to be great for you, right? So that you feel great about it and so that you will have other opportunities open up. But like for everybody else, they just want to work with somebody who's like a good dude.
Yeah, and that that reminds me of what I think it was my second game with Virginia Tech. That I don't know if he was doing this on purpose to mess with me, but Mike Burnip was like showing me fan tweets of people being like, "Who is this guy?" And but I was like, "Thank you, Mikey." But somebody, it was the second game I called, and a kid on Boston College, it may have been Quentin Post, who's still there, had a huge dunk, and it was so it was so thunderous. It caught me off guard, and my voice may have elevated too high. And a fan tweeted about who is this guy? He's way too excited for the Boston Cup for the other team. And I instantly was offended. And then I went back and listened, and I was like, he actually had a point. That was a little more excitable. But you're right. It's the play-by-play is so subjective, and in ways, it's just about making the listener feel comfortable. But again, what can you control and what can't you control, right? And so that's a big thing that Learfield has told me. And I think we are probably, and maybe to a fault, I don't know, more focused, we being those who come out of Learfield, we're more focused on all of the people you mentioned earlier, what their perception is of how you do calling the game and not the fans. And there's definitely a time for fan feedback and it's for
Mhm.
the fans at times. But, I know I'm thinking about the general manager and therefore the sponsors and therefore the live reads and the associate athletic director who's sitting nearby who's wondering who this person is and the coach and that's who I'm thinking about when I'm doing it because it's like those are the people you're working for in that moment.
Yeah, you had mentioned also as part of those fill-ins, like it's not the time to like tinker with maybe I want to work this word in more often or that sort of thing when you get that opportunity to really fill in. And I'm not saying like look, if you've got the first time you go call a game, just go do the best you can and learn from it and then
Yeah,
on and on and on. But like when you get one of those opportunities, because I don't know about you, Tim, but like probably probably 60 times in my life now, I've called a game where it's like, this is the biggest game I've ever called in my life. Cause like it always just gets a little bit bigger, right? A little bit bigger until like, well, now, we had the national championship game a couple years ago. So it might be a while before I feel that feeling again. But like, you can't, the, you're going to always feel like this is the biggest game because this is the newest big, bigger brand, bigger opportunity. This is big for a reason. And like our one of our last most recent podcast guests was my cousin-in-law Alexis Alfaro, who's an opera singer, and he was saying like you have to do all these vocal exercises when you're singing opera every day because you can't think about it during the opera. It's got to be reflexive.
absolutely.
You cannot, there's too much going on for you to be like, I need to make sure that, I've got the right posture and all that. It needs to just be habit. And that habit has to build some way, sometime. And so that's where I'm trying to encourage people that like if you really want to take this seriously, man, Sirius XM's not that expensive. Just listen all the time and like, flip your volume off on the cable all the time and call games and show up at high schools and call games. And if you want to call games, then call games. Don't not call games because no one's offered you a job.
Yeah,
Call games.
when I got it in my head, when I got the kick in the butt I needed, I went to, and again, fortunate, but everybody can find something like this. I went to the Greensboro Coliseum and I sat in the second row of the press row, which is massive, and I called 6 or 7 UNCG men's games a year into a recorder and got them critiqued. And, I probably thought I was above that. I went to Syracuse. I called Syracuse basketball on WAER.
The
But I
student
called
station, yeah.
yeah, I called Syracuse, and that's what you got to get out of your head because you're right. And in talking about this, it is an art and it's not all that different from an opera singer or a performer in any way, shape, or form on Broadway or even a athlete, right? It's all about the practice because like you said, you're not the more you can practice and the more that becomes second nature, then that stuff will come out organically when you're calling a game and you
Mhm.
can use your mental energy to focus on other things. And, that's what I try to explain to people who don't call games. And it probably makes sense to you. It's like there's two parts of your brain working when you're calling a game. There's the reflexive part where you're not thinking, and then there's the part where you've come in and you have a story that you want to get to, so you're focused on that, or something catches your eye and you have to like see what's going on in the stands and explain that, and you're trying to figure it out, and that's where your mental energy needs to go. But if you haven't practiced all those other fundamentals, you'll never get to that. Um, it's like this is random, but I've called so many games and I've done so much practice that the calling of the action is the second nature part to me. I still struggle with giving starting lineups because that part, like, I don't practice giving starting lineups, and then I still haven't figured out like in which way I want to read home, road, first, like stuff like that. So, but that's it. It sounds cliche and it's corny, but it's so true that you just have to practice the fundamentals over and over again because you don't want to be thinking about court location or the player. I mean, if you had to look down and figure out the player's name every time they touch the ball, you'd be in trouble.
Man, it's funny you say that about starting lineups because I still tinker with how. I mean, I'm in my
I
11th
script
year
them.
of.
I script them. Yeah.
I'm there, right there. Like the question is, how much do I script them? Do I script them like verbatim, or do I script them like with just I highlight this will be the starting lineup note? But yeah, I'm with you, man. Like it's there's lots to it that you're always constantly tinkering. I want to hear more about your Virginia Tech run. Um, it was a Cinderella story a couple years back. I mean, they were not supposed to go to the NCAA tournament. The only reason they did was because they won the ACC tournament as what was the seed again?
7.
As a 7 seed, right? And they
Hmm.
had a couple miraculous shots to keep that dance alive. Um, when you get the call, okay, John's out, we need to fill in. Why do you think you got that opportunity?
Combination of all the things we talked about previously, but I had called one of their games in November in Brooklyn. I was able to be local and at least somewhat local, and I had worked with the property. And so, what it's like, okay, we know you can call the game. What about this other stuff? Do we know that you can set up all the equipment? Do we know that you can work with burn up? Do we know that you can interview the coach? Do we know that you will get all the sponsor reads in? Do you know that you'll be easy to work with? All of that stuff. And um, I was just fortunate enough to, have that opportunity and check those boxes. And it was incredible. And if honestly, I tell people, and I hope this isn't the case, but if I never call another game again, like that run was wild. And I always say things have an odd way of working out for me. It's not always like the best thing in the world, but they just work out. And for them to go on that run in Brooklyn, I got to spend time with my family up in New York and friends, and I had people come to the game to watch that just became Virginia Tech fans. All of a sudden in January, all of a sudden, all of my friends and family were Hokie fans because of that, and it was awesome. But yeah, right place, right time. Like if I didn't call that game in November, I don't know. And I was also managing the property at the time, so how much luck is in there, who knows? But I think, I put myself in that position in ways by working to get there. And then, the rest took care of itself.
Yeah. Um, that call that I'm referring to, the buzzer beater goes in, they're going to the monitor, and I loathe situations like that because what you want is to have, you're thinking
Yeah.
to yourself, block out whatever else is going on so I get the call in first. But it's just really tricky because you want to have that call in case it stands, and yet there's the other part of you that just wants to be a reporter, doesn't want to miss what's going on. And so you're constantly trying to survey the scene to be like, what am I missing? What else needs communicated right now? Right. So it goes in, there's some doubt as to whether or not it's before the buzzer or not. And I just love how you said, check it all you want. We'll see you tomorrow night. Tell me
Yeah.
about tell me about like I don't think because you also just got done explaining all these things about you can't have your brain in all these different places thinking about all these other things. Tell me about being present in that moment, how that call just kind of felt to you and what was going on that week that allowed you to be kind of in a flow state and let you be present in that moment.
Yeah. not to put too much into one call, but you asked. So number one, the lucky part was the angle of which I saw the play unfold. I had no doubt that it beat the buzzer, and it was that perfect timing of he got the shot off with probably point eight, the ball's up in the air and about to go through the hoop, and then the red light comes on. So, I knew it. I was 100% certain. Virginia Tech had been on the bubble the entire season. Every time we I'll use the collective we for that year.
Mhm.
We would win a big game. Then it was just back and forth, back and forth, and you know how that is when you have memorized the net rankings and how many quad one wins you have, and it's just like that all year. And I can only imagine what that's like for the coaches, who say they don't pay as much attention to that, but it's brutal. And Virginia Tech had gone to Clemson the Saturday before the ACC tournament. It was essentially a must-win game to keep the bubble hopes alive and lost. And it was not good, and nobody was happy after the game. And they went into the ACC tournament basically knowing you had to win at least 3 games probably. And we now know based on the seeding and all that it had to have been 4. And the Clemson game was just a war, and it was really frustrating because it was a team that Virginia Tech was favored to win and probably um, not should have beaten, but really could have beaten, and Clemson would not go away. And Virginia Tech blew a lead late in the second half, and it did not look good. It did not look good. It did not look good. And I think there were some missed free throws and some help that led to that buzzer beater. And what I just remember about that, I'm again, I'm not super humble, but I couldn't believe how many people loved that call. But what I learned and what people told me over the years was like your personality, if you're doing this right, your personality will inevitably come across on the air. Like you can't fake that. So who you are as a person is going to come across on the air if you're doing this right. And that's tough for me because my personality is to be a snarky, sarcastic little, as my dad called me, little shit from New York. Like that's what I am. And I don't know how to make that endearing on the air. And so it's been a battle. And I have worked with a lot of people on this, and it's tough to make my personality come through on the air. And in that moment, that was my personality. That would have been me on the couch as a fan watching my favorite team when they went to the monitor. I probably would have dropped a couple of expletives and a couple of F bombs, and I would have said, you can review whatever. But I knew that that game was over. And so I was so caught up in the moment. And one thing I had done previously, too, was I called a buzzer beater in a national broadcast for the American AAC at the time. Memphis beat UCF, and I remember the call, and I went and listened back, and the limiter was on. I didn't go nuts. I didn't, I wasn't being showy, and it was more understated than it should have been. Well, this was different because I was so emotionally invested, and I'm not a screamer, but that was about as much as I could get out of my mouth at that time. I jumped up in the air because we won. The season wasn't over, and it had been such an exhausting like 6 or 7 days. But I knew it was good, and Burnup, who's always paying attention to the details and the officials and what's going on in the court, said they're going to review it. And I just instinctively wanted to make sure the listeners knew, don't worry about the review. Don't worry about it. We're not going to have to sit through this. It's over. And I just said, you can review it all you want. We'll see you tomorrow. And with a lot of intensity because I was so fired up from the shot. And I realized after the fact that it was kind of me like snapping back at Mikey, but I think he was okay with it. But yeah, that was awesome. And then it only got better from there. But I remember after that just thinking like this is gravy. Like just make sure you're having fun. Like, and that's the biggest thing is make sure you're having fun when you're calling these games.
Man, I appreciate you being so transparent about that because it's true. You gotta be yourself, and hopefully you like yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think, um, and over time you become more and more comfortable in your skin because it is vulnerable. Like I think that's maybe in some ways for some people one of the hardest things to work out. It's a very vulnerable thing to like put a headset on and then go on the radio or on a stream or something and be like, I'm going to try to perform now, right? For my next trick, here's this. And
Yeah.
like, that while you're trying to be present in the moment, you're not trying to think, you're not trying to be self-aware. It's not the time for self-awareness because self-awareness backfires in those situations. But like in the back of your mind, there could be people judging the hell out of you, like
Yeah,
showing up.
and well, and like I said, this talking out of both sides of out of my mouth, it's probably that's probably not the best approach, or that wasn't the best approach for games 1 and 2 and 3 for Virginia Tech when I was filling in. I mean, I was very I don't know if I'd say self-conscious, but I was conscious of like I'm filling in for someone who's been here for a while. This is a fan base that has a very intimate relationship with their talent, whether it be John or obviously Bill and Mike before
Mhm.
John and since Bill since he's come back. And so at early on, it was just do the job, just do the job. And it was probably that to a fault, to be quite honest. And over time, I got more and more comfortable, just saying, okay, this is only going to be good if it's fun, and it's only going to be fun if I can relax. And
Yeah.
the two biggest things that I focused on every game when I called those games was having fun and listening to Mike,
Yep.
because the product is better when the play by play and the color analyst are working as one. And that was the first time I had worked with a color analyst that frequently. And Mike is the mayor of Blacksburg, and as much as I'm the play-by-play, it's not his show, but it's close, right? And I just remember that was the advice given to me. It was just constantly listen to when Mike is talking. Like, you call a play, if Mike says something, don't scribble and look away. Listen to what Burnup's saying, because what the people want to hear is you and Mikey doing this together. And if
Mhm.
you're not doing it together, it's not going to sound good. And have fun and just relax and be yourself, and the rest will take care of it.
Totally. And I mean, you can't have fun if you're not being yourself. Like
Right.
it's just incompatible. And so, yeah, I mean, it's the weirdest thing. Like I go back and listen to some of these big moments of games that I called, when I was a fill in, and they were big moments. They were fun games. And even at Clemson, I mean, there was some big moments, ACC games, beating defending national champion Duke, going to the wire against North Carolina, fun stuff. But when the level of personal investment goes up, I get out here and now like I'm developing this reputation as a guy that loses my voice on big calls. And like that was never a thing until I got here. And it's like and it's not like I want that. And I would love to work on that and find the sweet spot. And yet, like, what am I going to do? Just dial down authentic enthusiasm for this amazing product and this once in a decade game that we just had against an arch rival on national TV when game day was in town? Like, what?
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Well,
Right?
I
Have
don't.
fun. Have
Yeah.
fun.
And I also don't think some people realize this, but I remember when people, I did not search my name on Twitter during that run, and I stayed away from that. But every now and then someone would show me something great, thank you. But I don't know if the common fan realizes like the level of investment that the play-by-play broadcaster has in his team, for an assortment of reasons. One, like, you want to call great games. But like being around a team when they're losing and interviewing the coaches and the players when the team is losing and the jobs are on the line and this is their livelihoods is a really, really, really tough experience. It is really just not fun. And so then you form the relationships with the players and the coaches and you root for them. And, I we've seen some job swapping. We see it every summer. And, I'll read the message boards about my friends getting jobs. And, when someone gets a new job, it's like, this guy's coming from over here and he's not from North Carolina. How could he possibly be this big of and it's like, you have no idea how quickly Tony Castricone is going to be a diehard Huskies fan. Like, and it just is, it happens naturally because, like, our inherent happiness is tied into the success of the team, and then it just comes out.
And not only that, but all of life is relationships.
Hmm.
and all of your career is relationships. And I mean, I remember my first year. So as a kid that grew up on a 46-acre pine tree farm in Centerburg, Ohio, 45 minutes north of Columbus, my first year in Washington, we play Ohio State in the Rose Bowl game.
Yeah.
And it's like I can't tell you how many times people came up to me the month before the game being like, "They're a little part of you that's going to be rooting for Ohio State," and I'm like, I just don't. I can't even I
No.
can't even process the question because I know precisely zero human beings on that other sideline. And yeah, they wear scarlet and gray, and that's like the colors that I wore growing up as a little tiny kid, right? Pre 18. Like I barely remember that. I actually have like a, my own personal Rose Bowl championship ring on the line,
Hmm.
right? Like I mean, this is like everything that everybody on this whole deal has been working on over the last 5 months of getting here early, staying here late, having these conversations, trying to get the notes. It all depends on this. And so I always say, like, when you get into this, you get into it because you love sports and you love sports because you love your team. But fans love teams, professionals love relationships.
Yeah.
And that's how coaches will go from one rival to another. That's how players will go from one rival to another. They don't think about it the same way, and we shouldn't either if we want to work in the business.
It's funny. I always make fun of, even though I was there for the Virginia Tech experience. If I talk to Matt Chazanow from NC State, like you ask him how the team's doing, he will give you the rosiest colored description of how it's going. He believes it, right? And same likely with you with Washington and whoever. And if you work for a team and you see them every day, I discovered this with Virginia Tech was like you see the upside and you see the downside, but you see the upside, and so you believe that like the upside should be the standard, and really the team is somewhere in the middle. But like I, to my core, believe that Virginia Tech team could have won the ACC tournament because I saw them play so many great games. Well, in that you see all these players perform at this level, and I remember Hunter Couture, who was the big shooter for Virginia Tech. I saw him have a couple of games where he hit five, six, seven threes, but the rest of the season he was like really slumping. But in my head, what his norm and what he's capable of is the seven threes. And so when he goes and hits seven threes in the ACC championship, you're like yeah, that's what it should be. And you're so happy for them and the coaches who you've watched do these scouts, and you hear them scout the other team and you realize how smart these guys are and all the things that you don't see. And it's like you're just happy, or I was just happy to see them fulfill what they believed was possible because it was possible. And like all the coach speak that you and all that stuff that you hear as a fan, you think it's coach speak. It's like not, because they see it, they believe it. It's just getting to that level repeatedly and at the biggest moments, and that team just happened to do it at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it's so fun being around and then picking the brain of coaches, which every coach, whether win championships or whether they end up finishing in last place, if you make it to that level, you're a great coach, right? Now,
Yeah.
you might not be the best CEO and you might lose your job or whatever, but like you're a great coach. If you're anywhere around a major program, you're a great coach.
Yeah.
And learning from these people is one of the biggest joys, and it's so much fun, and I just drink up what they have to say. And it was funny because like earlier you were talking about I can't remember verbatim what you said, but controlling what you can control or just being about the process or whatever. And it's like that's what every coach says, right?
Yeah,
Like I mean,
exactly.
it's coach speak, and you're just using that now to better yourself and your
Yeah.
career because all the stuff that everybody says, it's all true. And we want, you know, it's not the simple, like it can't be the simple answer. There's got to be some magic bullet that ends up. No, it's just the people that execute the simple thing most consistently. It ends up breaking through eventually. And yeah, being around a team is just a total joy. Hey, I want to shift gears real quick because you play a really big role in this thing called the college football blitz,
Mhm.
and this has
Great.
evolved. It's evolved
Yeah.
quite a bit over the years. And it is, I want to encourage people to listen to it because I think it's a great way to get your ears on a lot of great play by play on a Saturday. It's essentially the hometown radio red zone of college football, which is a brilliant product from noon to midnight Eastern on Saturdays. Although I wish I could get you guys to go until about 1 or 2 in the morning, but whatever. We'll take what we can get. What have you learned about play by play from working on the Blitz?
Yeah, it's a great experience. You can also listen live on the Varsity Network app, which I meant to plug earlier when you brought up SiriusXM. You can hear every Learfield broadcast and others on the Varsity Network app. So, and that's all free. So, um, you know, it's interesting having my ears on so many different broadcasts all at once. You know, at first it's like you hear sound quality, you hear the engineers and the best sounding broadcasts. And the differentiation between one broadcast to another, and you could have two broadcasts that both sound great and sound entirely different, and that to an audio nerd or just someone who appreciates radio is very noticeable. And then unfortunately, you hear some that struggle with that, whether it be because it could be something out of somebody's control, right? Like the effects feed doesn't get piped in, or the crowd, or the windows are closed, or they're in the corner, or something like that. Um, you hear the total different styles of play-by-play. Like an SEC broadcaster is just different than somebody probably in the Northeast or even in the Pacific Northwest. You get a lot of we's, you get a lot of us in the Southeast, and in other broadcasts around the country, especially depending on where the broadcaster originated from. That's not the case. You don't get a lot of that from Syracuse broadcasters. We'll stick our nose up and be neutral and all those things. And but that style is for real. I will say that, not to take the conversation negative, but you start to really hear which broadcast teams spend a lot of time on the officials. And some people would tell you that that's a good thing because the fans care about the officials, and that's a thing. But that's a real thing that I have noticed, that you will go back and forth between broadcasts, and there will be some broadcasters and some color analysts that are just constantly talking about the officials. And some fans eat that up and some fans don't. But just having the opportunity to hear all the different styles, and it's play by play is sometimes like unexplainable in that you can talk about what makes somebody good, but like what makes somebody resonate and it's somebody you want to listen to. Some of that stuff is just it just is unexplainable. It's like this comfort level and this way that they connect with the listener. And it's interesting to hear two or three guys that have totally different styles of broadcasting and totally different voices, that I would put them up against each other and not be able to choose like who I'd want to listen to, like or just an overall like broadcast quality type thing. I think back to you've got like Mark Johnson in Colorado, the voice of God, Mark Johnson, and his like his intense and booming voice. And then you flip over, and this was years ago, but when Jim Brandstetter and Dan Dierdorf were working together, and Jim Brandstetter is not a play-by-play. It was like having two color guys up there in an extent, even though Jim was doing play-by-play, but the two of them together were great. It was the two pals broadcasting a game, and it's totally different, but it made for like really high quality broadcasting. So it's just super cool to hear all that on a game day, and it's a super fun show to produce, and you've listened, and it has a lot of upside.
Yeah. Tell me more about sound quality. What makes because that's another thing that I tell people, if you want your tape to pop, it's got to sound like good. Like it's got to be pleasing to listen to. And it can be a high school game, but like it's got to sound good. And that's something within your control. When you're talking about control, what you can control, whether or not something's overmodulated,
Yeah.
whether it sounds like crap or whether it sounds like, oh man, like they've got some mics underneath the bleachers and it's sounding pretty good. What are you listening to from a sound quality standpoint?
That's the biggest. I mean, don't ever be overmodulated if you're making it, at any level. And that's where my obsessive nature kicks in is if I'm making a tape or if I'm calling a game. If I'm making a tape, I'll do like five different air checks and stop the recording and listen back to it live. Or if I'm calling a game, I'll text 10 different people and I'll swear to them that I need their help. Like Brian Bush is on the end of this text every time I call a game. Hey man, can you just listen in and let me know if the levels are good? And I'll text that to 10 other people, and then I'll get 10 different responses. But you don't want to be overmodulated. You want to have some crowd in the background. If you can get effects, find a way to get effects. That's a Syracuse special. That gets beaten into you at the age of 18 at AER. Don't take no for an answer and go find the A2 and get
And
the
it's getting
effects.
harder to do. And
Yeah,
for people who don't know, we don't have the ability in radio. And I would say this is even true at like the Westwood One level. I mean, they're not putting their own, microphones behind the backboard to hear that swish of the net. So TV does that, and then they feed that audio to radio. But like, you got to go find somebody, and if there's not a TV truck on site, they physically can't,
right.
which there's some of these remote productions and makes it hard. So yeah, it's a thing that makes like an enormous difference in the broadcast.
Yeah, and at this point, it's a lot of the time just the crowd. Mike, but make sure there is some crowd. That's a thing on the Blitz too that we will say like, man, it sounds like a library in there, and sometimes it's unfortunate. You'll hear two sides of a game. You'll hear the home and the road, and one will have the crowd up, and one won't, and one is decidedly, you know, a better listen than the other. So, yeah, it's all about the mix. That's where, if you're gonna make a tape and really do the thing, if you can find somebody to engineer for you, which I know is not easily accessible for everybody, and that may be just a Learfield thing because we've got so many people in there that can do that. But it's nothing. Nothing will do you more of a disservice, especially if you're applying for a job or sending a tape to someone. If you click play and the first thing you hear is poor audio quality. It's just a killer.
Tim, thank you for doing this. Thank you for the time. Great to catch up with you. Proud of you. You have done an amazing job at Learfield. Continue to do a great job, and I'm excited to see what's ahead. But it's been fun to watch you grow from a recently graduated college student to a guy that's now killing it in his play-by-play career. So congrats on all you've done.
For sure. Thanks. This has been fun. Appreciate you having me on. And yeah, a lot of changes, not the apartment, but everything else.